A king who rejects the soul chosen by the moon will one day rule nothing but his own regret. The old prophecy had survived 6 centuries, carved into forgotten temple walls where only the oldest priests still remembered its warning. Most believed it was nothing more than a bedtime story for reckless rulers. No one standing inside Moonfall Cathedral that winter night imagined they were about to become part of it. Silver bells echoed beneath towering stone arches as nobles from every pack gathered for the sacred moon choosing ceremony, the oldest tradition in the Northern Territories. Candles lined the polished marble floor, filling the cathedral with warm golden light, while a full moon shone through stained glass windows depicting the first Alpha King and his destined mate. At the center of the sanctuary stood King Adrian Blackwood, 31 years old, undefeated in every battle, respected by every neighboring ruler, and feared by every enemy who dared challenge his throne. Strength had shaped every chapter of his life, and strength was the only quality he believed deserved to rule beside him. A few steps away stood Victoria Ashford in an elegant ivory gown, every graceful movement carefully rehearsed. She had spent years earning admiration from the royal court, charming nobles with flawless manners and convincing many that she was the obvious future queen. Standing quietly behind her was her younger sister, Evelyn Ashford, dressed in a simple cream-colored gown without jewels or embroidery. She had not come expecting destiny. She had only come because every unmarried woman of noble blood was required to attend. Evelyn lowered her eyes as the high priest raised the ancient Moonstone above the altar. The enormous crystal had chosen every royal mate for generations. It had never been wrong. A hush settled across the cathedral as pale silver light slowly awakened inside the sacred stone. The glow drifted gently through the air before wrapping around Evelyn's wrist like a ribbon woven from moonlight itself. A second strand reached across the sanctuary until it connected directly to Adrian's hand. Gasps rippled through the gathering. The bond was unmistakable. The moon goddess had chosen. Evelyn looked up in stunned silence, her heart racing with emotions she could not explain. The invisible warmth flowing through the silver light felt strangely familiar, as though a forgotten part of her soul had finally found its way home. Across the sanctuary, Adrian stared at the glowing bond without moving. For one brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then it disappeared beneath cold resolve. Victoria stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Her voice remained calm, respectful, almost compassionate. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "the kingdom needs certainty. A servant's heart may be kind, but kindness alone cannot stand beside a throne." Her words were carefully chosen. She never insulted Evelyn directly. She merely planted doubt where pride already lived. Murmurs spread through the cathedral. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes toward Evelyn. Instead of seeing the quiet courage in her expression, he saw only someone who could never strengthen his reign. His decision came before his heart ever had the chance to answer the bond. "The moon chooses souls," he said evenly. "Kings must choose what is best for their kingdoms." The silver ribbon flickered. Even the priests looked horrified. Elder Priest Benedict took one trembling step forward. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "no king has ever rejected the moon's chosen mate." Adrian never looked at him. "Then history begins tonight." He turned toward the captain of the royal guard. "Remove Lady Evelyn Ashford from the royal succession. From this day forward, she will serve the crown as a palace servant. Let no one speak of this bond again." Silence crashed across the cathedral. Evelyn closed her eyes for only a single heartbeat before quietly extending her hands without resistance. She refused to beg. She refused to cry. As a simple silver servant bracelet was gently fastened around her wrist, the sacred moonstone above the altar released a faint crack that almost no one heard. Almost. Elder Priest Benedict looked up in quiet horror as a single line spread across the flawless crystal for the very first time in 600 years, while beyond the cathedral walls every white lily, growing beneath the winter snow, quietly closed its petals as though the moon herself had turned away. The kingdom quickly learned a dangerous lesson about silence. It was far easier to erase a title than to erase a person. Before the next sunrise, Lady Evelyn Ashford no longer existed inside the royal records. Every portrait prepared for the moon-choosing ceremony was quietly destroyed. Every guest was instructed never to mention the broken bond again. servants received a simple order from the palace steward. She is Palace Servant 17 now. Use no other name. Most obeyed without question. A few lowered their eyes in quiet discomfort. Evelyn never argued when the steward placed a folded gray servant's uniform into her hands. She simply thanked him, changed her clothes, and began reporting for work before the first castle bell echoed across Blackwood Fortress. Her mornings started long before dawn, carrying buckets of fresh water through endless stone corridors before lighting fireplaces throughout the eastern wing. By sunrise, she polished marble floors where noble families would soon walk without ever noticing who had prepared them. Every afternoon, she cleaned banquet halls that she herself would never be allowed to enter as a guest again. The work was exhausting, but what weighed on her heart was not the labor. It was hearing people pretend they had never known her name. Whenever nobles passed through the halls, they spoke freely as though she had become invisible. His Majesty made the only reasonable choice, one ambassador remarked during a luncheon. A kingdom cannot be built on sentiment. Another noble nodded in agreement. The moon may choose with her heart. Kings must choose with wisdom. Evelyn lowered her head and quietly continued arranging fresh flowers beside the windows. She never interrupted. She never defended herself. She simply carried on with the same gentle grace she had always possessed. Adrian rarely thought about the ceremony during those first weeks. His days remained filled with military councils, border disputes, trade negotiations, and preparations for announcing Victoria as the future queen. Whenever memories of the glowing silver bond surfaced, he buried them beneath responsibility. To him, the kingdom had demanded sacrifice, and he had convinced himself that sacrificing one woman's happiness had been necessary for lasting stability. Victoria encouraged that belief without ever speaking directly against Evelyn. She praised Adrian's wisdom before the royal court, admired his strength during public ceremonies, and quietly reminded him that history remembered rulers for difficult decisions, not emotional ones. Every carefully chosen word eased his conscience just enough to keep doubt from taking root. Yet strange things began happening inside the palace. Elder priest Benedict visited the sacred Moonstone every evening, only to discover that the thin crack across its surface had grown a little longer each day. The crystal still glowed, but its silver light had become noticeably weaker. Ancient records described no such change in the history of the kingdom. Even more unsettling, every white lily planted throughout the royal gardens remained tightly closed despite receiving perfect sunlight and careful attention from the gardeners. They appeared to be waiting for something that never came. One cold morning, while carrying linens toward the servant quarters, Evelyn noticed an elderly kitchen worker struggling to lift a heavy basket of bread. Without hesitation, she placed down her own supplies and helped him carry the load across the courtyard. The old man smiled gratefully. "You always notice the people everyone else walks past," he said quietly. Evelyn answered with the same gentle smile she had offered since childhood. Sometimes that is when kindness matters most. Neither of them noticed the small patch of frozen white lilies beside the walkway slowly opening behind them, one delicate blossom after another, as though winter itself had forgotten to hold them closed. Winter settled over Blackwood Fortress with quiet determination, covering the mountains in fresh snow and painting every rooftop in white. Life inside the palace continued exactly as the royal court expected. Banquets filled the great hall. Visiting nobles praised Victoria's elegance. Musicians performed cheerful melodies beneath glittering chandeliers. To anyone standing in those magnificent rooms, the kingdom appeared stronger than ever. Only those who lived behind the grand corridors noticed a different story unfolding. Palace Servant 17 became the first person awake every morning and the last to rest every night. She carried water before sunrise, mended worn blankets after dark, and quietly completed the tasks no one else wanted. Yet no matter how long the day became, she somehow found time to notice the people everyone else overlooked. When one of the young kitchen helpers burned fresh bread and feared losing his position, Evelyn stayed beside him until midnight, teaching him how to prepare another batch before the morning meal. When an elderly gardener struggled to protect delicate flowers from an unexpected frost, she worked beside him without being asked until every plant had been covered. When frightened children cried after becoming separated from their parents during a busy market festival, they somehow stopped crying the moment she knelt beside them with a calm smile and gentle voice. She never asked for recognition. She simply believed that kindness given quietly was still kindness worth giving. Little by little, people began sharing stories they could not explain. A stable horse that had refused food for days calmly accepted fresh hay after Evelyn spent only a few quiet minutes resting beside it. A lonely widow working in the palace laundry insisted her constant headaches disappeared after Evelyn brewed her a simple cup of herbal tea and listened without interrupting. Even the castle baker joked that his bread tasted better on mornings when Evelyn helped knead the dough before dawn. None of the stories sounded extraordinary by themselves, but together they created something far more powerful than rumor. They created trust. Adrian heard fragments of those conversations during council meetings, but dismissed them as harmless palace gossip. His attention remained fixed on border security, trade routes, and preparations for Victoria's official engagement ceremony. Yet every now and then, an unexpected image returned to his thoughts without invitation. He remembered the silver light surrounding Evelyn's wrist. He remembered the strange peace in her eyes when she accepted the servant bracelet without pleading for mercy. Most of all, he remembered that she had never once blamed him, even when he had taken everything from her. The memory unsettled him more than he cared to admit. One snowy afternoon, while Evelyn was sweeping the quiet western courtyard, a small white wolf pup wandered through the open palace gate. The frightened little animal had become separated from its family somewhere in the nearby forest. Guards immediately moved forward, afraid it might panic among the crowds, but the pup only backed away, trembling. Evelyn slowly placed her broom against the stone wall and knelt several feet away without making a sound. She simply waited with patient eyes and open hands. After a long moment, the little wolf cautiously crossed the snow until it rested its head against her palm. Every conversation in the courtyard stopped. Even the guards exchanged confused glances because wild wolves rarely trusted strangers so completely. At that exact moment, Elder Priest Benedict stepped onto the nearby balcony and witnessed the quiet scene below. His heart grew heavy as another forgotten line from the ancient prophecy returned to his memory. The moon's chosen shall never command loyalty. She shall awaken it. As he looked toward the palace gardens, he noticed something that sent a chill through his entire body. Every white lily growing along the frozen pathways had quietly opened, not beneath the full moon, but simply because Evelyn had walked among them. The story of the white wolf pup spread through Blackwood Fortress faster than any royal decree. Guards who had witnessed the moment quietly repeated it to stable hands. Stable hands mentioned it to cooks. Cooks whispered it to servants. Within days, nearly everyone inside the palace had heard that a frightened wild wolf had ignored armed soldiers and chosen to trust Palace Servant 17 instead. Adrian dismissed the tale with a quiet shake of his head. Animals sense gentleness, he told his council. Nothing more. His words sounded reasonable, yet they failed to quiet the growing unease inside the royal court. Elder Priest Benedict knew the kingdom had entered dangerous territory. For 3 consecutive nights, he climbed the highest tower of Moonfall Cathedral to perform the ancient blessing of the full moon. For 3 consecutive nights, the sacred crystal answered with less light than the night before. It no longer illuminated the cathedral walls with brilliant silver. Instead, its glow flickered weakly like the final flame of a dying candle. No priest had ever witnessed such a thing. They searched every sacred record preserved throughout 6 centuries of royal history, yet nowhere did they find an explanation. On the 4th morning, another sign appeared. The royal wolves refused to enter the Hall of Oaths, a place they had guarded faithfully since the founding of the kingdom. Instead, they stood outside in complete silence, their attention fixed toward the western wing where the palace servants lived. They did not growl. They did not panic. They simply waited, as though listening for a voice no human could hear. Benedict felt a chill settle over his heart. He finally understood that the kingdom was not losing the moon's blessing all at once. It was watching that blessing quietly withdraw, one sacred sign at a time. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained completely unaware of the changes surrounding her. She spent each day exactly as before, helping wherever she was needed without expecting gratitude. One rainy afternoon, she discovered that part of the abandoned western sanctuary had begun leaking through its cracked roof. Although no one had assigned her the task, she gathered cleaning cloths, wooden buckets, and simple repair tools before spending the entire afternoon protecting the ancient chamber from further damage. Thick layers of dust covered faded carvings of the moon goddess that no one had touched in decades. Evelyn gently brushed each stone with patient hands until delicate silver markings hidden beneath years of neglect slowly emerged once again. Someone loved this place once, she whispered to herself with a quiet smile. It deserves to be remembered, as she placed a small bouquet of freshly gathered white lilies. Before the forgotten altar, something extraordinary happened. Although storm clouds covered the entire valley outside, one narrow beam of pale moonlight slipped through a crack in the damaged ceiling and rested gently upon the flowers. The lilies slowly opened one after another, filling the silent sanctuary with a sweet fragrance that should not have existed in the middle of a cold spring rain. At that exact moment, far across the palace grounds, the sacred crystal inside Moonfall Cathedral suddenly brightened for a single heartbeat before fading once again. Benedict witnessed the brief flash with widening eyes. The blessing had not disappeared. It was responding, not to the throne, not to the crown, but to a forgotten servant kneeling alone inside an abandoned sanctuary. That evening he returned to the royal archives and unlocked a sealed chamber that only the high priest could enter. Hidden inside a weathered cedar chest lay the oldest prophecy ever written by the founders of the Northern Territories. As Benedict slowly unrolled the fragile parchment, one sentence immediately caught his eye, and for the first time in many years, genuine fear crossed his face. When the chosen heart is bound in chains of pride, the moon shall abandon the crown before she abandons her child. For the next 3 nights, elder priest Benedict scarcely slept. The ancient prophecy rested open upon his desk while dozens of forgotten scrolls surrounded him, each one describing moments when the moon goddess had intervened in the history of the Northern Territories. Every account repeated the same truth in different words. The blessing never disappeared without reason. It withdrew only when a ruler placed pride above the sacred bond chosen by the moon herself. Benedict compared every passage with the strange events unfolding across Blackwood Kingdom. The cracked moonstone, the fading blessings, the silent royal wolves, the blooming white lilies. One by one, every sign pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. The kingdom had not been abandoned. Its blessing had simply followed its rightful guardian. At sunrise, Benedict requested an audience with Adrian, but the king declined. Occupied by preparations for the Spring Alliance gathering where rulers from neighboring territories would soon arrive. Adrian believed restoring confidence among his allies mattered far more than entertaining ancient fears. Even so, something had begun troubling him in ways he could not explain. His sleep grew restless. The comforting certainty that had always accompanied every important decision seemed strangely absent. During military training, his wolf no longer answered with the same effortless confidence it once had. Nothing dramatic had changed, yet something essential felt farther away each passing day. Victoria noticed the quiet uncertainty growing behind Adrian's composed expression. Determined to silence every reminder of Evelyn, she proposed a simple solution. The abandoned Western sanctuary has become nothing more than a forgotten ruin, she said during a council meeting. Seal it permanently. The palace has no need for empty shrines that only encourage old superstitions. Adrian hesitated for only a moment before approving the order. To him, it was a practical decision. To Benedict, it felt like another step toward fulfilling the prophecy. The order reached Evelyn before noon. She accepted it without complaint. Carrying a small basket filled with fresh white lilies, she walked one final time through the quiet sanctuary she had spent months restoring. Sunlight filtered through repaired windows, touching ancient carvings that now shone with faint traces of silver beneath years of carefully removed dust. She placed the flowers before the old altar and whispered a simple prayer. "Thank you for letting me care for this place. I hope someone remembers it again someday." She expected silence. Instead, a gentle warmth spread through the room. The faded carvings surrounding the altar slowly brightened until every symbol glowed with soft silver light. Hundreds of tiny lights rose into the air like drifting stars before passing harmlessly through the ceiling toward the open sky. Evelyn stepped back in astonishment, believing her tired eyes had deceived her. Outside the sanctuary door, Benedict had witnessed everything. Tears filled his eyes as he realized that Ancient temple itself had answered her farewell. At that exact moment, the cracked moonstone inside Moonfall Cathedral pulsed once with brilliant light before another sharp fracture echoed through the sacred chamber. Priests rushed toward the altar in stunned silence. The crystal had never broken further in all the recorded history of the kingdom. Benedict closed his eyes. There was no room left for doubt. The Spring Alliance gathering would not simply welcome foreign rulers. It would become the day every hidden truth stood before the entire world, because the moon goddess had finished whispering her warnings, and the next sign would be one that no king, no priest, and no kingdom could possibly ignore. The Spring Alliance gathering arrived beneath a sky unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. Representatives from 12 neighboring territories filled the royal courtyard, their colorful banners fluttering in the cool morning breeze, while musicians welcomed each delegation with songs that had celebrated peace for generations. The palace sparkled with polished marble, blooming gardens, and golden decorations prepared months in advance, yet an uneasy stillness lingered beneath every smile. Even the birds seemed strangely quiet. Adrian stood before the assembled rulers wearing the royal crown that had belonged to the Blackwood line for centuries. Victoria remained gracefully at his side, every movement elegant enough to reassure the watching nobles that the future of the kingdom remained secure. Only elder priest Benedict understood how fragile that appearance truly was. Hidden beneath his ceremonial robes rested the ancient prophecy, now carried not as a forgotten relic, but as a final warning. The ceremony began as tradition demanded. The high priest approached the sacred moonstone to ask the moon goddess for another year of blessing upon the kingdom. Every voice fell silent. Hundreds of eyes watched the enormous crystal suspended above the altar. Benedict lifted both hands and spoke the ancient prayer exactly as it had been preserved for 600 years. Nothing happened. The moonstone remained dark. A ripple of confusion spread across the courtyard. Benedict repeated the prayer, this time louder, his voice echoing across the palace walls. Still the crystal refused to answer. Adrian stepped forward with calm authority. Continue, he instructed. The blessing will come. Benedict lowered his eyes before speaking words no priest had ever imagined saying before a reigning king. Your Majesty, the blessing is no longer listening to the throne. Uneasy whispers swept through the visiting rulers. Adrian's expression hardened. Enough. You will not spread fear through my kingdom because of an old superstition. Before Benedict could answer, a cool wind crossed the courtyard without warning. Every royal banner fell perfectly still. Every candle surrounding the altar extinguished at the exact same instant. Then the clouds above slowly parted. Moonlight poured across the palace grounds even though the sun had not yet set, bathing the entire courtyard in soft silver radiance. Yet not a single ray touched the royal throne. Instead, every beam crossed the courtyard until they gathered around one quiet figure standing near the servant entrance carrying a basket of fresh bread for the palace kitchens. Evelyn froze in surprise as the simple silver servant bracelet around her wrist began glowing with the same living light that had appeared during the moon-choosing ceremony. The basket slipped gently from her hands as warm silver light surrounded her without causing fear or pain. White lilies across every palace garden opened at once. The frightened white wolf pup from months before emerged from the crowd and calmly walked to Evelyn's side before sitting beside her feet. Moments later, the royal wolves entered the courtyard in complete silence. They passed directly by Adrian without hesitation and formed a respectful circle around Evelyn, lowering their heads as though greeting the one they had recognized long before anyone else. A collective gasp rose from the assembled rulers. Benedict slowly unrolled the ancient prophecy and read its final line before the entire gathering. When pride binds the chosen heart, the moon shall lift her blessing from the crown until truth stands where power once stood. At that exact moment, the silver crest engraved upon Adrian's crown faded before every witness. Tiny fragments of silver light drifted upward into the sky like ashes carried by a gentle breeze. The crown itself remained upon his head, but its sacred blessing was gone. Adrian instinctively reached for it, his heart suddenly overcome by an unfamiliar emptiness. Across the courtyard, he looked toward Evelyn, and for the first time since the night of the moon-choosing ceremony, he saw not a servant, not a mistake, But the woman the moon goddess had never stopped calling her own. No celebration followed the fading of the royal blessing. The palace remained wrapped in a silence heavier than grief itself. Visiting rulers postponed their departures, unwilling to leave after witnessing a miracle that would undoubtedly become legend across every territory. Servants whispered through the corridors. Priests prayed through the night. Even the royal wolves refused to leave the courtyard where they had bowed before Evelyn, choosing instead to lie quietly beneath the blooming white lilies as though guarding a sacred place. Adrian locked himself inside the royal library before dawn. For the first time in his life, he ordered every military report, council document, and political schedule removed from his desk. In their place, he requested something he had never cared to read before: records about Evelyn Ashford. The palace steward arrived carrying worn ledgers that no noble had opened in years. Adrian expected to find little more than lists of chores completed by an ordinary servant. Instead, each page revealed a life he had never bothered to see. There were handwritten notes from the royal physician thanking Palace Servant 17 for staying beside frightened children through long winter nights until their fevers passed. There were reports from the head gardener explaining that the Western Gardens had flourished again only after Evelyn volunteered to restore them during her few hours of rest. The captain of the Royal Guard had quietly recorded that young recruits performed better after Evelyn encouraged them before difficult training exercises, reminding them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep walking despite it. None of the records described miracles. They described thousands of unnoticed acts of kindness, repeated day after day, year after year, without expectation of reward. Adrian closed the final ledger and felt a weight settle over his heart unlike anything he had experienced on a battlefield. Yet the written records were only the beginning. He left the library without announcing his destination and walked through the palace alone. In the kitchens, the elderly baker smiled sadly when the king asked about Evelyn. "She never let anyone eat alone," the old man said. Whenever a servant missed supper because of extra work, somehow another warm meal always appeared waiting for them. Adrian continued toward the stables. The stable master gently stroked the white wolf pup, now sleeping peacefully in fresh straw. This little fellow trusted no one after becoming separated from its family, he explained. Only her. Sometimes the gentlest hearts are recognized long before the wisest minds notice them. From there, Adrian visited the orphan house, where children immediately gathered around him, not out of excitement, but because they believed he had come to see Evelyn. One little girl proudly showed him a small wooden birdhouse painted with tiny white lilies. Miss Evelyn said every bird deserves a safe place to come home, she whispered with a bright smile. Adrian could not find words to answer. As evening approached, he climbed the quiet path leading toward the abandoned western sanctuary. Sunlight poured through repaired windows, illuminating every stone Evelyn had patiently restored with her own hands. Fresh, white lilies still rested before the ancient altar, even though no one had entered the sanctuary since the festival. Elder Priest Benedict stood waiting beside the doorway. Without accusation, he handed Adrian the weathered prophecy one final time. Adrian slowly read the final sentence aloud. "The moon does not choose the strongest ruler. She chooses the strongest heart." His voice faltered. At last he understood that the kingdom had never been sustained by his victories, his armies, or even his crown. It had quietly endured, because the woman he had reduced to Palace Servant 17 had carried its hope with nothing more than compassion. Adrian lowered his head as tears he had not shed since childhood finally filled his eyes. For the first time since becoming king, he did not ask how to reclaim his blessing. He asked only one question: where is Evelyn? Adrian found Evelyn exactly where Benedict had said she would be, not in the royal gardens, not inside the restored sanctuary. She was at the small orphan house beyond the palace walls, sitting beneath an old oak tree while several children laughed around her, carefully painting tiny wooden birdhouses with white flowers and silver moons. She looked up as Adrian approached, but there was no fear in her eyes, no anger, and no triumph. There was only the same quiet kindness she had offered every person she had ever met. The children sensed the seriousness of the moment and politely carried their paintbrushes inside, leaving the two of them alone beneath the gentle afternoon sunlight. Adrian stood in silence longer than he had intended. Every speech he had rehearsed along the walk suddenly felt empty compared to the years she had endured without complaint. At last he spoke. I spent years believing that a crown made me worthy to lead. His voice was calm, but it carried a humility no one had ever heard from him before. Now I understand that I was only borrowing authority I never truly deserved. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She had learned long ago that the deepest truths often arrived after silence, not before it. Adrian slowly removed the royal crown from his head. Without the moon's blessing, it looked like nothing more than carefully shaped metal. He placed it gently upon the wooden bench beside them instead of wearing it as a symbol of power. I cannot return the years I stole from you, he continued. I cannot erase the day I chose pride over the truth standing in front of me. I cannot ask destiny to begin again. He lowered himself onto one knee, not because ceremony demanded it, but because his heart finally understood what humility required. But I ask for your forgiveness, not so I may reclaim what I lost, but so you never have to carry the weight of my failure any longer. A soft breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying the sweet fragrance of blooming white lilies across the quiet meadow. Evelyn looked toward the distant palace before returning her gaze to Adrian. I forgave you long before you came here, she answered gently. Not because what happened was small, but because bitterness would have become another prison. I refused to let pain decide the kind of person I would become. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes, hope and sorrow existing together for the first time. Then, is there any path back? Evelyn smiled with genuine warmth, the kind that comforted without offering false promises. Forgiveness opens the heart, she said softly. It does not turn time backward. Her words settled between them with quiet honesty. She reached forward, not to accept the crown, but to help Adrian rise to his feet. At that very moment, several palace servants arriving with supplies stopped in astonishment. One by one, more people gathered along the nearby path. None of them spoke. They simply watched their king standing beside the woman he had once refused to acknowledge, seeing them for the first time not as ruler and servant, but as two souls forever changed by truth. Adrian made no attempt to explain himself to the growing crowd. Instead, he turned toward them and spoke with complete sincerity. From this day forward, no one in this kingdom will ever be measured by title before character. The words spread through the gathering like the first light of dawn. Evelyn looked at him one last time with quiet gratitude, then gently picked up her basket of freshly baked bread. She thanked the children waiting inside the orphan house, smiled warmly to the servants standing nearby, and began walking toward the restored sanctuary beyond the valley. She never looked back, not because she carried resentment, but because she had finally discovered a future that no longer depended on the choices of a king. And beneath the rising full moon, Adrian understood that the greatest act of love he could offer was to let her walk toward it freely. Summer arrived quietly across the northern territories, and with it came a peace the kingdom had not known in many years. The cracks that had divided noble from servant, ruler from commoner, and pride from compassion slowly began to heal. Adrian kept every promise he had made beneath the old oak tree. The decree identifying palace workers only by numbers was abolished. Every servant's true name was restored to the royal records. The Western Sanctuary was officially reopened, not as a monument to the throne, but as a place where every citizen, regardless of rank, could seek comfort and hope. The royal crown remained inside the Hall of History, untouched upon a marble pedestal beneath a single inscription that Adrian had written himself. True authority begins where pride ends. No one questioned his decision. They had all witnessed what happened when a king placed ambition above destiny. Far beyond the palace walls, Evelyn continued rebuilding the forgotten sanctuary hidden within the peaceful valley where silver streams crossed fields of white lilies. Travelers arrived from distant territories carrying stories of loss, uncertainty, and broken families. They did not come searching for miracles. They came because they had heard there was a woman whose kindness reminded people that hope could survive even the darkest seasons. She welcomed every visitor with the same gentle smile she had once offered frightened children, lonely servants, and wounded hearts inside the palace. Without realizing it, the valley slowly became a place where strangers left feeling like family. On the first full moon of summer, thousands of people gathered there without receiving invitations. Farmers stood beside nobles. Soldiers stood beside merchants. Children carried baskets filled with blooming white lilies while elderly priests walked silently among them. Adrian arrived as well, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in simple dark clothing, choosing to stand quietly among the people instead of before them. He neither expected nor desired recognition. He had come only to witness whatever destiny had prepared. As moonlight slowly spread across the valley, an extraordinary stillness embraced the gathering. The wind faded. The streams became perfectly calm. Every white lily opened at the exact same moment, covering the hillsides in shimmering silver beneath the night sky. Then a warm light descended from the full moon, brighter than any torch, yet gentle enough to calm every heart present. It surrounded Evelyn without casting a single shadow. The simple silver servant bracelet she had worn since the day her life changed slowly dissolved into countless points of light, rising like tiny stars toward the heavens. The light did not disappear. Instead, it gathered above her head, weaving itself into a living circlet of silver branches and moonlit lilies unlike any crown forged by human hands. Elder Priest Benedict quietly lowered himself to one knee. One by one, every priest followed. Then the visiting rulers bowed their heads. The royal wolves emerged from the surrounding forest and knelt peacefully around the valley. Finally, Adrian placed one hand over his heart and bowed with them, not because anyone commanded him, but because reverence had replaced pride. No voice echoed across the valley. No proclamation was spoken. None was necessary. The blessing itself had already chosen. As the silver circlet settled gently upon Evelyn's head, the cracked moonstone inside Moonfall Cathedral, many miles away, restored itself without a single mark remaining. For the first time in years, its light filled the kingdom once again. Benedict smiled through quiet tears, understanding at last that the prophecy had never been about punishing a king. It had always been about protecting the heart the moon had chosen from the beginning. Adrian lifted his eyes toward Evelyn and felt no longing to reclaim what he had lost. Instead, he felt gratitude that the kingdom had been given the leader it truly needed, even if that leader would never sit upon his throne. As dawn painted the horizon with soft gold, children laughed among the white lilies while birds filled the valley with song, and every person who witnessed that unforgettable night carried the same lesson home. A throne may command obedience. A crown may inspire respect, but only a heart that continues choosing kindness after betrayal will ever be worthy of the moon's eternal blessing. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts, like, share, subscribe, enable notifications, and join us for more unforgettable alpha romance stories ahead.